Let's start with a story. Think about Kamisi, this young man, really searching for peace.
Right.
He and his family, they've been to countless imams, desperate for relief from what they see as jinn.
It's a very real fear for many.
Absolutely. And they didn't stop there. Psychologists, traditional healers, I mean, they've really tried everything. It paints a picture of, well, sheer desperation.
It really does.
And it leads to this fascinating point. They even started wondering if Christians could offer some kind of help.
Which is quite telling. Kamisi's story, right from the start, it just shows us, doesn't it? The lived experience of Muslims is often so much broader, more complex than just the formal religious practices we might typically think about.
Yeah, it really goes beyond the textbook definitions.
Exactly. That's such a powerful way into this. His situation really highlights that if we genuinely want to understand, the lives of Muslims, we need to look past the structured beliefs and rituals of, well, what's often called formal Islam. We have to consider popular Islam. That's the everyday stuff, the deeply held values, the whole worldview that shapes how most Muslims actually navigate their day-to-day lives.
So the things that really matter on the ground.
Precisely. And while loads of resources understandably focus on formal Islam, the daily experience often involves things that kind of sit outside those neat boxes.
Right. So this idea then of looking at Muslims on a human level, that really clicks. It feels a bit like how anthropologists view religion.
Yes, very much so.
Not as this separate compartment of life, which is maybe a more Western way of thinking.
That's a very common tendency, yeah. Anthropologists often see religion as a cultural system that's woven into everything. Christian anthropologist Paul Hibert, he gave a really useful, broad definition. He talked about religion as our core beliefs, about the ultimate nature of things, the deep feelings that drive us and our fundamental values and allegiances. It's a much wider lens than just doctrines and ceremonies.
That makes sense. It's more holistic.
Exactly.
Thinking about religion as this kind of integrated cultural system helps us move past that often artificial split we make between the spiritual and the practical.
Yeah.
In many parts of the world, certainly including Muslim majority societies, there's this pervasive understanding of both visible and invisible forces constantly interacting.
Right. The unseen world is very present.
Very present. And this perspective lets us really appreciate the multifaceted ways people make sense of the world around them.
Okay, so with that broader perspective in mind, our goal for this deep dive is to explore 3 general ways of looking at Muslim experiences: Orthodox, folk, and secular. And these aren't like rigid boxes, more like useful reference points.
Absolutely. Think of them as points on a spectrum based on shared values, worldviews. It's a framework, really, just to help us get a handle on this diversity and hopefully foster better understanding and connection.
Good. So let's start by digging into what we mean by Orthodox Muslims.
Okay. Orthodox Muslims, sometimes you'll hear terms like fundamental, doctrinal, or official Muslims. And this includes groups like Salafi and Wahhabi movements. They represent what you could think of as the high religion end of a spectrum of practice.
High religion.
Yeah. They're typically characterized by strong ties to religious institutions and a profound reliance on the Quran and the Hadith. That's the sayings and actions of the Prophet Muhammad as the main sources for their theological beliefs.
Got it.
Leadership in these communities is usually held by trained religious specialists, sheikhs, imams, mullahs. These are often people who've had extensive education in madrasas or famous Islamic universities like Al-Azhar.
Right. So there's a strong emphasis on formal learning and authority. And it sounds like their focus tends to be on theological reflection, the big questions about eternal realities.
That's a really key aspect, yes. Orthodox Muslims primarily engage with what we might call the cognitive dimension of religion.
The thinking part.
The thinking part, exactly. Their followers are often deeply interested in cosmology, the origin and structure of the universe and ontological meaning, which gets into the very nature of being in existence.
Wow. Okay. Deep stuff.
It is. They're wrestling with those timeless human questions. Where did we come from? What's our purpose? What's right and wrong? And, crucially, what happens after this life?
So for them, their faith provides this comprehensive map for understanding all these profound human questions: origins, purpose, morality, destiny.
Precisely that. A complete framework.
And this connects to that idea of a Gil-Tennyson's worldview, doesn't it? Where following divine law is absolutely central.
Absolutely central. Their understanding of the relationship between people and God often revolves around obedience to what they see as divine law and avoiding sin.
Right.
This framework where actions are judged against a clear divine code and sin creates guilt that needs repentance and following religious practices to fix it, it's very core to their worldview.
Okay. We have an example here, Galib. He seems to embody this. He makes a real effort to pray 5 times a day, even tries to make up missed prayers.
Dedication.
He wants to emulate the Prophet Muhammad in how he looks, wants a modest Muslim wife. His focus is very much on the afterlife, seeing life as a series of tests.
That's typical, yes.
And interestingly, when he talks with Christians, it often turns into theological debates, specifically trying to argue against concepts like the Trinity.
Galib really is a good illustration of this orthodox approach. His life is structured around fulfilling religious duties, following scripture closely, and engaging with these defining theological concepts. For him, Islam gives the definitive answers, both for now and the hereafter.
Okay, that's clear. Now let's shift gears and look at folk Muslims. They seem to occupy a really different space on this spectrum we're talking about.
Very different, yes.
Sometimes called nominal, informal, or popular Muslims, and apparently they make up a huge chunk of the Muslim world population.
That's right. It's quite striking, actually. Phil Parshall estimated something like 70% of Muslims globally practice some form of folk Islam.
70%. Wow.
Yeah, and Robin Hardaway even points out that many who might identify as Orthodox still weave elements of folk practice into their daily lives. It's not always strictly one or the other.
Huh. So what are folk Muslims focused on then?
Well, folk Islam really steps in to deal with the everyday worries that formal Islam doesn't always directly address. Things like seeking blessings called barakah, and dealing with negative stuff like curses, jinn, and that pervasive fear of the evil eye.
Ah, the evil eye. Yeah, you hear about that a lot.
Absolutely. So their main concerns are less about abstract theology and much more about the practical realities of just getting through life.
Like dealing with fear, sickness, wanting peace, navigating issues of shame, finding meaning day to day.
Exactly those things. Finding solutions for the here and now.
And where do they look for those solutions? Is it still the Quran?
They certainly draw from the Quran and Hadith, yeah. But their sources often broaden to include local magical text, maybe, and deeply ingrained cultural symbols and practices.
Okay, so it's a mix.
It's often a mix. Their approach to morality is sometimes described as more, let's say, pragmatic, adapting to what they feel is needed to interact with the spirit world, maybe appease supernatural forces.
Right.
And while they might know about formal doctrinal objections to, say, Christianity, their immediate worries about protection and well-being often just take precedence.
So it sounds like they're engaging much more with the emotional side of things, the experiential aspect of religion and culture.
That's a good way to put it, the affective dimension.
And driven often by a fear-power kind of worldview, which feels quite different from the orthodox focus on doctrines and rules.
Very different, yes. As Hyber pointed out, folk religions often provide meaning by directly tackling those immediate existential questions of daily life. And they offer a sense of belonging, a place, and worth within their specific social world.
Right. It's about making life manageable and feeling secure.
Pretty much, yeah.
We have Aisha as an example here. Doesn't go to the mosque much, but prays when she feels a specific need. She takes part in Ramadan, seeing it as a time for blessings and power against evil.
Yes, accessing spiritual power.
And she's really worried about the evil eye affecting her kids, so she uses amulets with Quranic verses on them for protection.
A very common practice.
But she's also intrigued by stories of Christians casting out demons, yet hesitant, maybe scared.
Could be fear of the unknown or maybe social consequences. But Aisha's practices, they really spotlight the core concerns of folk Islam. Her focus is on tangible protection, seeking blessings in this life, using religious symbols and practices in ways that directly address her immediate fears, especially around her family.
Okay. That gives us a good picture of folk Islam. Now, let's move to the third category. Secular Muslims.
Yeah.
That term itself, secular Muslim, it sounds a bit like a contradiction initially.
It can sound that way, yeah. But it describes a really important and growing group within Muslim communities globally.
So what does secular mean in this context?
Well, the term secular Muslim, which sometimes overlaps with labels like liberal, modern, or progressive, it acknowledges the huge influence of secularism as a kind of counter worldview in modern society.
Okay.
Now, secularism here doesn't automatically mean anti-religious. It's more about a perspective that tends to diminish or maybe redefine the traditional role religion plays, both in public life and private life.
Right. It pushes religion to the margins a bit.
Or changes its function, yeah.
Yeah.
It's actually a similar kind of tension you see with the term folk Muslim, as Caleb Kim noted. People can hold both formal and folk views depending on context.
Ah, okay.
Similarly, Muslims growing up in predominantly secular societies often find themselves navigating both secular values and aspects of formal Islam. So secular here really reflects that dominant cultural backdrop.
Got it. So it's about the context they're in. What are their primary concerns then? How do they engage with religion?
Secular Muslims are often primarily concerned with what we could call the evaluative dimension of religion,
Evaluative, meaning?
meaning they're often seeking a moral order, a framework for values. They have fundamental allegiances that get expressed as values. They might still feel a connection to Allah, but they often struggle with the sheer pluralism of the modern world.
All the different viewpoints out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they can be quite skeptical often of what they see as religious hypocrisy.
Yeah.
It's noted that secular Muslims are frequently younger people, maybe desiring change, but finding traditional Orthodox Islam seems resistant to it.
Which can cause friction, I imagine.
Oh, definitely. They can be seen as a threat sometimes. And their sources of authority, well, they often come more from mainstream media, entertainment places, largely shaped by secular values.
Right.
So some might actively try to reform Islam from within, while others might even consider leaving religion behind altogether.
A real spectrum of responses there, too.
A very wide spectrum. The tension between tradition and modernity is often really pronounced for them. They're trying to figure out how to reconcile their religious or cultural identity with the values of the secular societies they live in.
Okay, let's look at Rashid's example. He doesn't really connect with prayer or formal religion, but still calls himself Muslim.
Yes, the identity remains important.
His skepticism is fueled by, the actions of Muslim terrorists and some leaders.
That's a common factor for many, yeah. Disturbed by extremism done in the name of their faith.
He does Ramadan, but it sounds like it's more for family tradition and maybe a lingering personal belief in God.
Right. The cultural and familial ties are strong.
He dreams of moving west for more freedom of belief.
Yeah.
And he's kind of drawn to freedoms he sees in Christianity, but also suspicious of problems in any organized religion.
Rashid really captures those complexities, doesn't he? He holds on to a cultural connection to Islam, but grapples with these big questions of faith, morality, individual freedom, all within this very secularized world. That skepticism and desire for personal freedom are pretty characteristic.
Okay, so this brings us nicely to the idea of a Muslim spectrum, ranging from, say, high religious practice to lower, with Orthodox, folk, and secular Muslims as key points along it.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's crucial to remember, like you said, these aren't rigid boxes. It's a spectrum. There's overlap. People can shift.
So important to stress that. It's fluid. It's dynamic. Someone might identify mostly as Orthodox, but still hold some folk beliefs, or be heavily influenced by secular values from their job or education.
Right. Many Orthodox Muslims might have folk and secular aspects, too.
Absolutely. The key is just recognizing and appreciating the sheer diversity within Muslim communities and understanding the different cultural and religious dimensions shaping individual worldviews.
Okay, so let's try to quickly recap the three types and their dimensions. Orthodox Muslims, mainly focused on beliefs, the cognitive side, often asking, how is God great? Seeking answers through maybe a truth encounter.
Good summary. Then folk Muslims engage more with feelings, the affective dimension, often asking, why do we suffer? Looking for solutions through what could be called a power encounter.
Right. And finally, secular Muslims, often concerned with values, the evaluative dimension, wrestling with what is my purpose, often through an encounter focused on allegiance and belonging.
Nicely put. And it's worth just briefly mentioning that each of these orientations might come with different underlying assumptions, maybe different confrontational questions when they encounter new ideas, and what the source material called different gospel bridge questions.
Okay.
All things that can give us deeper insights into how to better understand and, connect with people from these diverse backgrounds.
It really all comes back to the importance, doesn't it, for anyone wanting to understand Christians, anyone really, to move beyond just a theoretical or textbook view of Islam. Yes.
And to genuinely engage with Muslims on a human level, making that effort to understand the diverse realities of their lives, their values, their fears, their hopes.
Exactly. Which leads to a really important thought for you, the listener, to take away. Considering these different dimensions we've talked about, the focus on belief, on feelings, on values, what might be some maybe less obvious or unexpected areas of common ground, where could connections be built when forming meaningful relationships with people from Muslim backgrounds? It's definitely something worth pondering as you navigate your own interactions and strive for that deeper understanding.